I'm off.
It's live. We're live.
Great. So thank you, everyone, for joining today. My name is Katja Nwator, and I am the founder of Philanthropy Circuit, a nonprofit organization focused on bridging the data and information gap on African philanthropy and telling stories about giving and philanthropy from an African perspective. I'm your host for today, and I'm really honored to be speaking with two expert development practitioners who are my colleagues in the field and who are doing amazing things in their respective organizations. Today, we'll be talking about women's leadership in African philanthropy. And I know this is a topic that not many are familiar with. We've received quite a few questions and interest from different audience members, about what this is all about. And I'm hoping that this session today will give you a bit more knowledge and insight into women's leadership in African philanthropy, the role that we play, and the opportunities and challenges. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our amazing panelists. And to start off, I would like to introduce you to Mosun Layode. Mosun is a development professional with 2 decades of experience in international development and nonprofit leadership. She currently serves as executive director of the African Philanthropy Forum, where she works extensively across Africa to establish and emerging philanthropists who are committed to the sustainable and inclusive development of Africa. I've known Mosun for a few years now, and really proud of the work that she's doing in this space. So Mosun, thank you for joining us and welcome to
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here. Hello, everyone.
Thanks, Mosun. And our second panelist joining us today is Liz Ngonzi. Liz is an international social entrepreneur, educator, and speaker, helping purpose-driven leaders and organizations worldwide to clarify, develop, and share their stories in order to increase their impact. Liz founded the International Social Impact Institute last year through initiatives with the King Bowden Foundation, Nelson Mandela University, Hunter College at the City University of New York, and several other organizations. And she works with them to impact lives around the globe. So Liz, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be with you, and thanks for the opportunity. And good morning, everyone from New York.
Thank you. So now we will give you a few sort of comments and to set the scene and set the stage around this topic. And then we will hear from both Liz and Mosun around their sort of leadership story before we dive into a panel discussion where I'll ask some questions. And we also invite you that are joining us live today to add your comments in the comment box, either on YouTube or other platforms where we're being streamed.
Awesome. Do you want me to go ahead and jump in? Or
so one moment, sorry.
Okay, no problem.
I have a slide that I'm supposed to be sharing. For some reason, it's not pulling up.
No problem.
You asked me to close my tabs. Are you seeing tabs on my screen?
No, what it is that if you have a lot of tabs open, it actually makes your sound choppy, and you're a little bit choppy. So I was just trying to.
Let me try. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I'm not able to share my screen, but it's okay. So let me, provide some background to this discussion. So in the past few years, there have been several studies that have examined the rising role of women in philanthropy globally. According to some of these reports and studies done by different research institutes and even articles, women now make up a significantly larger percentage of the labor force in the development sector, with more women occupying management and leadership roles within nonprofit organizations, corporate and private foundations, and in some cases, development agencies. There's also an increasing number of female philanthropists as more women are rising professionally in the public and private sectors, moving to higher income brackets. And what we're seeing is that they're setting up their own formal organizations to channel their giving, or sometimes supporting, other causes. Now, while some of this data comes from international development sector, we are certainly seeing similar trends on the African continent. In countries like Nigeria and Kenya, for example, we're seeing more women working for and leading nonprofits and private foundations. Some of these women, like our guest panelists today, are playing what I consider to be a critical role in shaping the narrative of African philanthropy, its practices, and its approaches on the continent. Another important group of women who are influencing this narrative are African female philanthropists. We have philanthropists like Grasa Michelle of the Grasa Michelle Trust, Siti Masasiwa of the Higher Life Foundation, and Toyin Saraki of the Wellbeing Foundation, who are championing a number of different development initiatives. Through their organizations, these women and others like them are funding and driving development outcomes in their communities, in different countries, and sometimes even outside of the continent. So with this background and context in mind, we're hoping that this topic that we're discussing today, which is women's leadership in African philanthropy, will help us underscore the increasingly important role that women are playing as catalysts and change agents in Africa's development and philanthropy journey. I think this is a perspective that is sometimes left out of the global discussion or even the discussion on the continent. For instance, when we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, when we talk about different country development plans and agenda, what we find is that women's voices, women's contributions are often left out. So I'm hoping that this discussion today will kind of showcase that women are contributing, starting with the two amazing speakers that we have here today. So at this point, I'd like to invite Liz to start us off and share with us your leadership journey or your leadership story in the development and philanthropy space. So over to you.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to commend you for hosting this conversation. It's a very important one, and it's very rare that we have an opportunity to discuss this. So I'm excited to have this conversation with the two of you. My journey is a long one. It starts off in Uganda, but I grew up we moved to the States when I was 4 years old, but I always remained connected to Uganda, to the African continent, because I was raised by a very strong African woman, who taught me and modeled for me what it means to be a good corporate citizen, right? So I grew up in a home where I saw folks like raising money to help, to help other people. We started an organization to help AIDS orphans when I was in high school, and the like. So it's something that I kind of grew up around. But in terms of just, my professional leadership, I spent the first 10 years of my career in corporate America, and the last few years in management consultancy. And I worked for a firm that was involved in a corporate scandal that I was really not happy about. And that's the reason why I left corporate America. And I decided to start my own firm and really work with organizations, bringing all the skills that I had. So my marketing background, sales background, my relationships and the like, to be able to help nonprofit organizations. And I spent the beginning of that time, so sort of early 2000s through 2009, focus on American organizations. And it was really just through a series of sort of relationships that I started working with organizations on the African continent, having been invited to speak in a conference in South Africa. And I met a bunch of organizations, and it kind of went from there. And I also, at the same time, I teach at New York University. I'm an adjunct assistant professor of fundraising in the Center for Global Affairs. And what I found in working with different nonprofit organizations, teaching them, as well as speaking at different conferences and meeting different people, is that it's always been the same organizations that had access to they could afford to go to New York University, could afford to pay for the training and the like. And it was the same organizations that would be considered by foundations, the same organizations that were being highlighted. And I was really frustrated about that, because I was thinking about the organizations that are really on the ground, that are the grassroots level, they're really making the very important, kind of impact that we need, and really understand the challenges, really didn't have access to anything. And so it's something that kind of stayed with me as I sort of evolved. And I was working at, for 4 years, I worked as the turnaround CEO for Africa Tikkun USA, which is the North America representative of a South African organization working with youth children and youth in the townships, and just really seeing how this ecosystem works and how it's excludes people, made me realize that, moving forward, I really want to be part of that solution of really making sure that organizations that are in marginalized communities, whether they be in the US or in developing countries, and my specific focus is on, the African continent, making sure that they have access to the knowledge, the resources, the networks that are necessary for them to be able to meet their missions and to be able to really make the impact that we need. And it's even much more so it's even more imperative now, given what COVID has done and the disruption that's created within the sector. An estimated 50% of organizations are going to shutter, and so it's important that those that stay alive have the opportunity to thrive, and they can do so by having access to the knowledge, to the networks, and the like that can help them to attract the funding they need. So that's really what I'm focused on, is making sure that organizations that have been left behind get access. I mean, if we talk about, I'm sure Mosun has seen this study, and the two of you've seen this, that only 2% of funding coming to organizations on the African continent actually go to organizations run and led by Africans. And so that's a challenge. It's a real problem. So how do we make sure that we change that? And so the Institute is really set up in such a way that we can address that through courses, through events, and through connection to funders and research and the like.
Thank you, Liz. Really amazing story about how you move from, corporate America, supporting nonprofits in America, but then also now expanding that work to the continent and helping to drive resources as well, resource mobilization for African nonprofits. Thank you for the work.
Thank you.
So, Mosun, over to you to hear your leadership story.
Thanks, Katja. And again, it's so wonderful to see Liz. We met, maybe 10 years ago, and it's just exciting being on this with her. So I don't have, I didn't have an earth-shattering experience, or there wasn't anything that rocked my world, that brought me to the development space. One thing I do know for certain was that in my third year in university, so I studied urban and regional planning. And in my third year in university, we had a course on sustainable development. And that was the first time I heard about the concept of sustainable development, living responsibly so that the coming generations have a planet to live in. And, at that point, I just made up my mind that I wanted to work in the development space. So I got out of school not looking I didn't apply to banks, I didn't apply to all companies. I was just looking to work with nonprofit organizations, because I immediately recognized that the best place that my impact could be felt, or I could work in a way that would transform lives, was to work with nonprofit organizations. And so I started my journey in the development space over 20 years ago. And I had the wonderful opportunity to work with one of the leading social entrepreneurs on the African continent, and that's Ndidi Nwuneli, running LEAP and working with young Africans that were really challenged. I wanted to be today's leaders, not leaders of tomorrow. So that was one exciting thing about starting out in the space, just knowing that you don't have to wait for a position, you don't have to wait for a certain time to make a difference in your community. And it was just inspiring seeing young people start projects all across Nigeria, and it's amazing to see how LEAP has grown over the years. But I was at LEAP for almost 10 years, I think about a little over 9 years. And then I made the transition to work at WIMBIZ, and I'll be talking about the women that founded WIMBIZ later on today, because we're talking about women and philanthropy. And that was an amazing opportunity to work with leading women in Nigeria, and that had footprints across Africa, who are leading in corporate Nigeria, running businesses, leading in the public sector, and challenging other women, and being a catalyst for change in Africa, in Nigeria, and in Africa, and ensuring that women are equipped with the skills and tools that they require to break the glass ceiling. I mean, it's a whole journey, and we're so excited to see people like Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, I say that she exploded the ceiling. It wasn't breaking the ceiling, and we're so excited. But it's a journey, and there is a need to develop a pipeline of women. So we don't continue to see the same women at the top, but we see volumes of women taking on leadership positions, not just in the nonprofit sector, but all across Africa and across the world. And I thoroughly enjoyed working with women. It really changed my lens because I started seeing things through the gender lens. And before I was at WIMBIZ, I didn't, in as much as I was very feminine focused and driven, it wasn't, all my decisions were not shaped by the gender lens. And I left WIMBIZ with that mindset. I'm always looking out for women, identifying gaps and, asking why there isn't a woman representative here and why we're not pushing women forward. And for me, it was a natural progression moving to African Philanthropy Forum, having worked with two leading nonprofit organizations and having to raise funds and raising these funds from international donors. You or Katja, you've been in this space. Liz, you've been in this space. And a lot of those that may be on this call or, have just been in this space have experienced, that challenge of proposal by after proposal on doors. It's as much as there is funding available for from the international community, it's not limitless, so we are competing for the same funds, and it is important that we begin to tap into our own local resources, because as African wealth is increasing, individuals are increasing in wealth, corporations are increasing in wealth. And so we can't continue to take a backseat when it comes to funding local nonprofits. And so being at African Philanthropy Forum is a wonderful opportunity to work with African philanthropists who are committed to doing good in Africa and working with them to be more strategic and deliberate in the way they give, such that we have sustainable and inclusive development on the African continent. And it's been an exciting journey. And I always say that the COVID pandemic has been a mixed blessing because it has created an opportunity for us to really step up to the challenge. And what we need to see beyond the astronomical giving that has taken place in the past 1 year is sustaining that momentum and building systems and structures that will ensure that we're ready to take on challenges in future. So super excited to be here and looking forward to having this conversation with two amazing ladies.
Thank you so much, Mosun. And again, thank you, Liz. I think both of your experiences, there's a lot of things that I can connect to and relate to, obviously with my own journey, just growing up with a very strong social consciousness at a young age, but then also being frustrated by the system and being frustrated by corruption, being frustrated by the lack of resources that indigenous organizations were experiencing. So your stories definitely resonate with me. So I want to go a bit deeper into this topic and maybe just take us a step back. Mosun, you did mention something around, the gender lens and how that sort of helped shift your thinking, or at least enhance your thinking and approach to development. So maybe I'll pivot to Liz on that question. I've been reading a lot of research around women and philanthropy, and I saw something that really struck me. It said that women generally have more empathy than men and are more likely to give to charitable causes. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that there's a specific gender lens that's currently driving development in Africa? Or is it completely devoid of a gender lens? And perhaps is this what is shaping our participation and role in philanthropy?
Okay, wow. That's quite a question. It's a great question, actually. I do believe that, there is a gender lens, right? I mean, we're, as human beings, men approach things differently from women. And before anyone calls me a male basher, I'm not. So I just want to be really clear about that. I do believe that women do approach philanthropy in different ways, and I think Mosun can speak to this. If you take a male philanthropist versus a female philanthropist, a male may be more in. While they're both going to be very interested in making a change, one of them is going to want to be celebrated more than the other, and you can choose to think about who that person would be. And so the way that they're motivated to make that change is going to be very, very different, right? Women naturally, like when I think about my grandmother in Uganda, she and her friends used to raise money. They used to give their time, the Mothers Union and things like that. So we've always seen women sort of involved in philanthropy in terms of their giving of their time, in terms of giving to one another and to being a supportive of the community, right? And I think that when we talk about today and we talk about more organized sort of giving, the men are the ones that are more visible, right? If you think about philanthropists in Africa, you think about men. Yet we have a lot of women who are doing a lot of work, and it's just because they're doing it in the back. They're doing it quietly in the background, and they're doing it as communities together, not necessarily just this individual who wants to sort of be showcased, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, because everyone likes to be spotlighted. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think it's just different. I think women will one, they're kind of more in the background. Two, they're more likely to do so, that giving in collectives and together. And of course, at that higher level, women have started their own foundations, but certainly they're not necessarily going to be as in the front as men are going to be. And that's from my perspective.
Thank you. No, I mean, there's a lot of that I connect with, even just looking at, how I operate in the sector. So, I think most people in our audience, may have some strong reactions or opinions to those differences, but they do exist. And I think it's important to recognize that. So Mosu, from your perspective, I have heard you say that, giving is part of our African culture. And that, we are communal in nature. And I just wanted you to shed a bit more light on what you mean by that, because we've heard this quite a bit, Africans are givers. It's innate. It's who we are, Liz, like you said, there's a lot of probably more collective giving than individual giving. But Mosu, can you shed a bit more light on what that means to you? What is the essence of Africans are naturally, philanthropists mean? And if we break that down further to women and how African women are perceived or viewed in the African context, how do we connect those, right? Africans as leaders and then women as caregivers, perhaps, Do you see like a link, a connection between the two?
Right. So I think Liz started speaking to this when she talked about her grandmother. I don't know of any African that is an island that doesn't have, a whole extended family. It's we're being westernized in a way that we no longer know our neighbors, and we're beginning to live in silos. But over time, we have always existed in communities. I grew up with, in our house, there were cousins. I always joke about a cousin of mine that came and just never went. Got married from our house, and when my mom passed when I was 13, and I had to live with my auntie for a brief period. My auntie passed in, this is the year of the pandemic, was last year in 2019, and we sat down and counted the number of people that had lived in her house, and there were about 40 of them over time. She died in her 80s. So people were always going in and out. So we don't. There's an adage where I'm from. I say it all the time. In Western Nigeria, you cannot be a rich person in the midst of poor people. It's impossible. You can't close your eye to the suffering that you're seeing around you. So that's how we've evolved, or how we've always been in Africa. Someone dies, we contribute money. Someone, there's a wedding, we contribute money. You're never left alone. If you Liz has had the opportunity to live in DC, I don't know if she's able to, if she's if her fridge is empty, she can just go next door or go to her community. You know, you can do that here. So that's what I mean by us being communal people. We're naturally givers, just by the virtue of being raised as not as nuclear families, but as extended families. And everybody is family. You know, everyone is an uncle, everyone is an auntie, even if you're not blood relatives. So I think that's what makes Africa unique. And that is what also makes our brand of philanthropy unique, because it's not motivated by incentives, government incentives, or any tax breaks you're going to get. It's just we give because we have to. If we don't give, we won't be able to function in our society, given the level of need that we have around us. And pivoting that or segueing into women, you know, women are the backbone of the society. If women are empowered, everyone is empowered. Women make decisions. And even back to my Wimby's days and all the research that we did around women, we always argued, it's women make decisions at home, in terms of what the brand of commodities that you're buying, and then corporate organizations will not have women on their boards. It just doesn't make sense. So it's the same in the community. There is an innate there's this God-given, if I'll put it that way, ability that women have to connect, to understand issues, to see beyond, what everyone would generally see, and know that these are people that we need to support. These are areas of need. If this is a danger waiting to happen if we don't step into this situation now. So I would say that, that does not take away from the fact that men are doing work in this space, but women have the ability to get more done and move faster, just by virtue of being women and, the skills that we naturally have. And also with, just connecting with issues and having empathy for the next person.
Thank you. I really like that perspective, that it's innate. Yes, we can get things done, faster. And it's really the backbone of not just who we are, but that we are the backbone of society, from the family structure, but then also how that translates into our professional lives. And I think that's where I want to go next. So when we talk about women as leaders in nonprofit organizations, in foundations, it seems like there's a lot of interest there. We have more women now that are leading large-scale nonprofits, that are leading private foundations. And, you've mentioned, of course, Leap Africa. There's also Junior Achievement, Teach Africa. There's the Dangote Foundation, the more formal private foundations. There's the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation in South Africa, all led by strong, phenomenal female development practitioners. And so what do you think is enabling women's interest and employment in this sector? Is it this sort of innate, gift, quote unquote, that we have, which is about caring for people? Is it the empathy? Is it that, we are, frustrated by the injustice? Just from your perspective, Liz or Mosun, whoever wants to jump at this.
So well, first of all, I love the fact that Mosun decided to go into this work right out of university, right? I was part of that generation. I'm not that, but where we talk about greed is good, right? Wall Street, that movie, like people were talking about buppies, and you were trying to get a career to move up the corporate ladder, which was really contrary to what I'd grown up seeing, right? Because my mother worked for UNDP, my father was a playwright and an educator, and so my brand really should have been social impact, but somehow I went to the corporate route, and then I switched. So I love to see that Mosun started out that way. But in terms of women being in the sector, I think that I was thinking about that question, and from from where I sit, what I believe has happened is if you think about women rising through corporate environments, right? Corporate environments are very harsh for women who may be at child bearing years, who may want to have sort of more of a work-life balance. And so I could see probably if you were to study this, you probably would see quite a number of women exiting in their 30s from that corporate environment and moving more into the social impact world. One, because they're probably looking for more of a meaning to the work that they're doing and they're not necessarily as motivated financially. Two, it's also looking for more of that work-life balance. But we all know who've worked, those of us who worked in the sector, that you work just as hard in the nonprofits as you do. But I think it's a combination of really sort of saying, I need to sort of get off of this track. I mean, when I worked in when I was a management consultant, I mean, I worked in like 3 different cities every week. I was always traveling, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night and not know where I was, because it was just that harsh of a sort of a work environment or kind of work life that I had. And so I couldn't have that balance. And so I think the women are sort of thinking about those things about, having more of a balance, maybe taking care of their kids or whatever it may be. The other thing is looking for that meaning, right? Because there at some point, yes, the paycheck is very important. And yes, you want to be able to move through different organizations. But I think that sense of meaning is important. I also think that if we look at where we are developmentally, as a continent, you had a time where people were really focused on generating income, right? And so you go from that point of, I'm really very much focused on income. And then you get to a phase where, and even in your life, where you start thinking about legacy, you start thinking about impact and the like. And I think that we're just in that phase, just as a society, where people are looking to make an impact more publicly. I'm not saying they haven't been giving, because they have been giving. I mean, I've paid for burials. I've paid for, even from New York, for weddings. So people are giving. But I think thinking about it more structured and thinking about maybe working in organizations that are really working to solve these challenges. In terms of the women being in the sector, I actually have a presentation that I did in 2013. My colleague Coco is going to drop the link in the chat, and it's called Africa Tech and Philanthropy. And I showcased women who were working in big organizations. So at the time you had, she's still there, Pumzile and UN Women. You had Teges Germa, who at the time was the first Secretary General for AMREF Health USA, which is the AMREF Health Africa, which is the largest health development organization on the African continent. We had Winnie Banyima, who at that point had been named the executive director of Oxfam, who's now the executive director of UNAIDS. You had Amini Kajunju, who at the time was the executive director, of the president of the African American Institute. And so we have a lot of women who've been working in this space, or starting to work in this space in leadership roles. And I think they've left corporate environments. There's opportunities that have opened up for them here, but also we're just at a point where people are thinking about development. They're really thinking about how can we really make a difference in the lives of those, our fellow humans on the African continent, because it's not going to be we're not going to be saved by people from elsewhere. It's that we're going to really have to, really jump in and make those differences. And I think women are really in a position to do that. One point I also want to make is that when you talk about women being in leadership roles in the sector, if you've heard of the concept of a glass cliff, glass cliff is a concept that really speaks about whenever an organization or company is in trouble, right? Is going through some kind of a challenge. That's the time when actually opportunities open up for people like women or people who are other to step into leadership roles, because basically what happens is that if they fail, then you can always blame it on them. But if they succeed, then, well, that's a good thing, right? And then probably at some point they'll be pushed out. But so if you look at a lot of organizations that have attracted or have been able to put women in leadership roles, it's typically when the organization is in a very challenging situation. And so they bring them in. So women, be ready to be turnaround people, or be ready to become that, that kind of that catalyst when an organization's trouble, because that's generally when you're going to get that opportunity.
Liz, that is such a great point, about how women are kind of brought in to save the day. And I'll be really interested into your study. So looking forward to digging into that a bit deeper. You also touched on some of the challenges as well, with women in leadership. So I want to offer a chance for Mosun to also chime in here that, despite us seeing more women support of many of these organizations, are there challenges, maybe with your experience in biz, perhaps your own personal experience, are there challenges that women are facing in these roles?
Right. I think the first, I thank you, Liz, for sharing those points, and I like the fact that you talked about looking for meaning, because that's what I hear a lot of women say, and because I've been in this space for such a long time, I tell women that are looking to transit corporate Africa, or corporate world to development space, that it isn't easy. So it's not a place to come and raise your children. It's not a place that you have all the time in the world to get things done. So because the work is deeply challenging, and that leads me to your question. Yes, women still face challenges, just as women face challenges anywhere in the world. So the fact that we're in the development space doesn't make it any easier. And there is also this notion, and I want to correct that non-profit work, development work is for women, because it's not challenging. I have a friend that was in a meeting and mentioned that she runs an organization, and a guy said, "Oh, it must be a non-profit." Like she didn't have the skills required to run a for-profit or leading for-profit organization. So there's that misconception that it's easy sailing. It isn't. And why it is more challenging is because you need, we're doing good work, but we have to run it as a business. And I always I tell people that we come in contact with, that the fact that we're non-profit doesn't make us, we run efficient organizations. We just don't share profit. That's what makes us different from non-profit. So we still have to go through the rigors of sustaining, being financially sustainable, and raising funds, which we've talked about, and we've talked about the need for an African Philanthropy Forum, because it is difficult raising funds, knocking on doors repeatedly. And then I think one of the I'm answering these questions, but not directly. The other thing I think it's important to note at this point, because there are some misconceptions out there. Women don't support other women. Any opportunity I get, I speak to this. I have never received more support from anyone than women, and maybe that's because I've always worked with women, or in the large part of my career. So I think we need to break down that misconception so that women don't come into the space thinking they need to be aggressive and they need to fight other women for position. We need to be able to work together and collaborate. Some of my closest friends in this space, and even our friendship has transcended the development space to our personal lives. I met them in the development space 20 years ago, and we've stayed friends. So I think it's important that we break those barriers and misconceptions, and work collaboratively together. So I think the challenge in this space, I would say, is largely around collaboration. Because we're fragmented. So there is a lot of people doing a lot of work, doing the same thing, and we really need to check our egos at the door and come together. If we're working on the same issues, we're able to pull more resources together. Part of the challenge that we have in fundraising is some organizations have large funding to give, but they wouldn't want to give to a small organization. But if we come together as a coalition, we're in the same space, we have the same objectives, we can solve these problems. So I think that those are some of the issues we have to contend with. But to be honest, these issues are not different from any other sector. Women face the same challenges in the development space as they do in the corporate world.
Yeah.
Thank you for highlighting that. I think it's a huge misconception, which is why I asked that question, because people tend to undermine the work that is being done in the development sector, almost, like the forgotten sector, that, the idea of this third sector, which is a term that I'm not, particularly keen on. So recognizing that, we all face similar challenges, whether you're in the private sector, whether you're in the development sector, but the underlying, I guess, call to action here, how can we collaborate better? How do we check those egos and make sure that, as a group of organizations, we support each other, and perhaps also raise resources, together to be able to drive development a bit further, because that's what it's about at the end of the day. It's how do we make development work? How do we bring dignity to people's lives? How do we reduce inequalities? And I think if all of us have that goal in mind, the barriers will kind of begin to crumble, as we obviously get to know each other better, network and work together, over a period of time. So thank you for pointing that out, Mosun. I wanted to just take a moment to recognize, all the people who are watching us live and commenting and, making great contributions. We see you. We see you, Janet Butler. We see you, Tola Oduyemi. We see you, Awa Chore. We see you, Fabia. We have someone from Canon Education, and a few other people who are, giving us some good feedback. And hopefully if there's time, I'll read some of it. But before we move into our last segment, which will be a Q&A, we did send out a registration form. We received questions from quite a number of people. And if you also have questions, for those of you that are watching now, please drop them in the chat. But before we move into that, I do have one sort of final discussion question for Liz and Mosun. And this is really now about, the emerging philanthropists that are in the sector. So, over the last 2 decades, we've seen an increasing number of female philanthropists globally. So this is not an African phenomenon. This is all over the world. And according to the Women's Philanthropy Institute, the personal wealth of women has increased. And I think it's about 40%. Women hold 40% of global wealth. And while that obviously isn't parity, it kind of is a huge deal. Now we can, discuss where is that wealth situated. We obviously know it's not, primarily on the continent or even, at all. But I think what's important here is that women are rising. Women are taking up space in philanthropy. And just wanted to pass it to Liz first to share some examples or insights of any, women philanthropists that are in this space that you think is important for us to note and to recognize, so that perhaps others can be inspired, but also that we all learn these names and recognize them in the sector.
Okay, great. So this is exciting question for me. I want to take us back a little bit. I know we want to talk about current philanthropists, but I think it's really important for us to recognize people who've been doing this for a while, because I think there's a misconception that African philanthropy, right, in the structured way that we see it, is just a recent phenomenon, but it's actually been around, and there's specific people. And Mosun can attest to this, because the person I want to share with you her name is Teresa Imbire. She's also known as Mama Imbire in Uganda. And she's a serial entrepreneur who's been a serial entrepreneur since the 1970s. She's 86 years old, okay? But this is a woman who has championed the rights of women, economic empowerment throughout that time, whether it's through her businesses, right, as an employer, but also she co-founded a women's bank early on. So, in the 1981, that was designed to provide women with 0% interest loans to be able to start businesses so that they could be in charge of their own economic empowerment. That's very important, right, for us to note that. She then subsequently founded or co-founded the Uganda Women Entrepreneurs Association Limited, which, really, again, invests in women entrepreneurship. And so here's someone who's been working at this for a very long time. And in fact, she's about to receive a papal recognition for all the work she's done through her church, but also around women's economic empowerment. So she's done that through, through this association, through donations, but also just giving women opportunity to be able to be in charge of their own sort of economic sort of life. So I think that's important for us to consider. The other person I'd like to recognize is another Ugandan, Jacqueline Asinwe, who's a Ugandan lawyer and as well as philanthropic advisor, and she's the current chair of the East Africa Philanthropy Network. Another person I want to mention is UK-based Noella Kosaris, who is a philanthropist and a model who started what was the George Malaika Foundation, I guess it's now known as Malaika. And so it's a school and a community center and organization in the DRC doing incredible work, which you should definitely learn about. And so that's another person I want to mention. And then we should think about an organization that the organization that was founded by African women for African women's organizations funding them is the African Women's Development Foundation in Ghana. And it's run by women. And in fact, that's something we need to really understand, is that that's the organization that provides the most funding for African women's causes. So let's recognize that and recognize that that was started by women. And I think they've just celebrated, I believe, their 30th anniversary. And so folks have been doing this work for a long time.
Thank you. And thank you especially for the mention of, the African Women's Development Fund, because that has played a huge impact. I know they've done a lot around funding for feminist movements, women-led organizations, and are really a trailblazer.
Right.
Mosun, over to you to share your own examples or
absolutely. Yeah, perfect example of AWDF. I actually had them on my list. Founded by Erelu Bisi Adele Fayemi, close to home here in Nigeria, Joan Foster, who is Ghanaian, and I believe Hilda Tadra, who is
Ugandan. Yeah, she actually went to high school with my mom.
Fantastic. They've been doing amazing work. And I believe they've given close to $60 million since they started in 47 African countries and the Middle East. So worth mentioning. And they just had a transition from Theo Sawa, who was running it for about 20 years, I believe.
Yeah, or maybe for a really long time.
And they have another amazing woman running it now. So that was one. So we'll save time on that. I also was going to talk about WIMBIZ, because WIMBIZ was started by 13 amazing women. And I always say one brave man, because one man in the midst of 13 strong women, he had to hold his own, because this was way back when nonprofit working with women was still very grassroots led. And these were women that had the vision of, supporting professional women, in corporate Nigeria and also in entrepreneurship. And they invested their own funds in the earlier years, and they continue to invest in this, and it's grown. I think WIMBIZ is in its 20th year now, and has seen significant. I met Liz through WIMBIZ.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing what has been done, and we need to recognize that. And it was WIMBIZ
and I visited you at WIMBIZ. Very
yes, you did. Amazing that we're connecting now. And it's just amazing to see how much female-led organizations have evolved as a result of WIMBIZ being in the space, and are even doing greater work with younger women, like She Leads Africa. So for me, in terms of emerging philanthropists, female philanthropists, I'll say it's you, it's me, it's us. Look at the next person. Yes, we do have, there is increasing wealth on the continent. Yes, 40% wealth, and some of it generated on the continent or by Africans in the diaspora. But as much as we need to have our eyes set on these people, I think we should also look to ourselves, because we are all philanthropists, and if we all step up and get behind issues strategically, deliberately, we're going to make significant impact on the continent. My dad always used to say that a quick penny is better than a slow pound. So if we put our pennies together, we're able to do much more, so I would say we are the emerging philanthropists, and we need to bring our friends into the space. We need to get those that are already in the space, philanthropists that already give us, to get their friends into the network. And they're also the next gen. Wealth is passing on, so we have like I'll give a good example of the Masiuas, for instance. Mrs. Masiua is the board chair of African Philanthropy Forum. Amazing work they're doing through Higher Life Foundation, but you can see that wealth is already transcending to, the next generation, and their children are already getting involved, so those are that's another group of people, there are those coming into new wealth, and there are those that are inheriting wealth as well, that are coming into the space, and we need to celebrate or keep an eye on.
That's a really good point. And Katja, you mentioned that 40% of wealth is held by women, but there's about to be huge transfer in the middle of transfer of wealth that's going to go to women. So it's going to be even higher because of for inheritance purposes. So just wanted to note that. And of course, with the next generation emerging as well, that is a very significant area for us to consider. And then, of course, the person in the mirror, ourselves.
Absolutely.
Like she said, I agree 100% with you on that.
Absolutely, yes. And it was just interesting to hear AWDF 30 years, WIMBIZ 20 years. I mean, we have organizations who've been doing this work for so long. Yeah. But again, you don't hear that much of how they fit into this context of development or philanthropy in Africa. And I think that's kind of my motivation, is how do we tell these stories? How do we capture the data? How do we get this discussion to be more mainstream? And so I think if you look through the comments, we're getting a lot of great feedback and additions to the conversation. I think I see Fabia here from Wiscar, who's saying that Wiscar has been around for 13 years now, and this is women in successful careers. Yeah. So we have questions that we received from participants, and I want to give us a chance over the next 10 minutes to try to address some of those. But this has been a really great conversation so far, and really excited by the energy that both of you are bringing to this discussion. So I'm going to read some of these questions, and again, encourage others who are watching live to drop their questions in the chat. Hopefully we'll get to them. But the first one here is from Rosamond Edem from the Foundational Network Africa. And she's asking, how can female founders position themselves effectively as a catalyst for change? So who would like to answer this first?
I can take it. So I think the very first thing I think we've all mentioned is storytelling. We have to become very comfortable telling our stories. We grew up in societies or in cultures or homes where we're told to sort of, be humble and not brag and so on and so forth. But as someone who teaches people storytelling organizations, I always say that it's important for you to learn as a leader how to tell your story, because it's what's going to help people to come around you and support the work you're doing and ultimately help you to create the impact you're trying to create. So I think that's a very important part of anyone's leadership, whether it's a woman or a man. The next thing is to understand that you have to build a network. A lot of what I do, a lot of the things I'm able to accomplish is because I have relationships with people going back 30 years or so, 40 years. In fact, I was just interviewed on IG last week by a woman I met when I was 10 years old, right? Like I've known her since then. It's someone I've had a relationship with since then. And it's important that we understand that no woman or man is an island, that we have to, in order for us to be able to build our organizations, our companies, or whatever it is we're trying to do, we have to collaborate with other people, and we have to understand that we have to build mutually beneficial relationships. Too many times people are looking for what they can get out of a situation, not understanding that actually the best way to network with people is to first give, and then when you want something you can ask, because you've already sewn into that relationship. But too often people just want to get quickly in and out and are very transactional. It's not a really smart way to move. And if you're going to have a sustainable run as a leader, you have to have those long-term relationships. You have to have people who can vouch for you, for people who can look out for you and provide opportunities and that kind of like, and you have to do the same for them. So that's another thing that's important. And then as you rise, you need to bring people up with you, right? And so even as a leader, like, whether it's in my own company or it's working with students and so on and so forth, I'm always about mentoring, right? So yes, and I think that if you understand that if you mentor the people who work with you, if you mentor the people who are sort of in your space, you actually can get the best, you can bring out the best in them to be able to work on things most effectively with you. So and I think that's uniquely something a woman, is able to do. I think we're much more mentoring rather than being sort of top down in our approach as leaders. And I think the other thing is taking opportunities to establish yourself as a thought leader. And that's easy to do now with us being online, right? It's very like you can anyway. I mean, I live streamed 22 times last year on LinkedIn, using LinkedIn Live just on my own. I paid no money; there was no money for it that I do, but I was able to get the message out there. And so, if you have a message and you have something you want to share, or you want to talk about your organization, or you have a perspective, just go ahead and do it and start talking about it, because that's how people learn who you are. That's how people get involved in that you're doing. And so really important to do that, because that's the difference between when you start your career and you get to mid-level management. It's about what you know and your skill sets and all that. But to get to top level management and to be a leader, you have to, it's about your thought leadership. It's about your networks and who knows you. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. And I think my takeaway there is, offer value. Always offer value first. Always give first. But I think we tend to be, very transactional when it comes to, how we interact, how we network. But if you go in offering value first, you may be building stronger networks and relationships with people in the sector.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go on to the next question because we only have,
Sure.
just a few minutes left. But Mosun, this one is probably for you. This is Christy based from USAID's Encompass program. And she's asking, where is the community of philanthropists? How are they learning from each other? And how can we help them?
Can you hear me? Because there's no sound from my end. You can?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
So there are lots of communities of African, I run African Philanthropy Forum. We're a network of philanthropists across the continent, and we're very targeted. Our membership is focused on philanthropists and social investors. It's not open to NGOs. There are others. Liz mentioned the East Africa Philanthropy Network, which is a network in Eastern Africa. There's the Africa Philanthropy Network, which has a broader audience than APF does. There are quite a number. There is the ARA Foundation, ARA Philanthropy Foundation up north. So there are quite a few, and I'm happy to take this offline to discuss this further with you. But we do have a vibrant community growing on the continent, and there's a lot of Africa Philanthropy Fund creates a platform for philanthropists to exchange ideas, to learn and share from one another. We are constantly connecting philanthropists with other philanthropists and sharing knowledge in this space to ensure that we all bring because there are emerging philanthropists and then we have the established ones. So we're ensuring that there's knowledge transfer in that space.
Great, thank you for that.
Can I ask her, Mosun, you mentioned something about the diaspora, that you guys are doing something with a platform to engage diaspora? Sorry, that's what I'm curious myself.
It's a good one, and thank you for mentioning that. So there is so much wealth transfer from Africans in diaspora into Africa, and in some years, in fact, it exceeds development aid coming into Africa, and Nigeria alone. Remittances coming into Nigeria alone have exceeded development aid coming into the entire continent. So it's a huge one, and we recognize the need to work more closely with the diaspora in such a way that funding that is coming in, it's not only for giving fish, but teaching people to fish, so that we're able to utilize funding and create a funding structure that enables recipients to receive their funding, but we're also able to generate some wealth that can be used to systemic change on the continent. Thank you, Liz.
Sure.
Absolutely. I think that role that APF is positioned to play is so critical in bridging that gap between the diaspora and the continent. So looking forward to hearing more when you kick that off. Maybe just a last question to kind of round us up before I give you a chance to give any closing remarks is, how can women in leadership, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. How can basically, sorry, is there a network for women specifically in the development sector to connect and empower each other? And this question is coming from our Traore from Greenpeace.
Right, so to be honest, I know of networks, but they're informal. And this is actually an important question. I may be thinking of something that is more formal. As I mentioned, I have a network of friends locally and internationally that I've been connecting with for the 20 years I've been in this space. So but I would say I always tell people, to start with the people closest to them. And those people will connect them to the next person. However, I guess there's a need for a more structured network that brings women in development together. And for all I know, there may be, but I don't know of any. I know of more informal ones. Liz, I don't know if you can.
Yeah, so for those of you on Facebook, there's an organization, Black Women in Development. It's hashtag BWID, and it's on Facebook now. They've also established a WhatsApp group, and I've met a lot of women from sort of on the continent as well as in the diaspora, and share a lot of really great opportunities, resources, frustrations, and so if you have an opportunity, go ahead and ask to be added to that. Another organization is WOC, W-O-C. It's Women of Color in Philanthropy and Fundraising. It was started by a woman named Yolanda Johnson. She is U.S. based, but she does have sort of a global view to this thing. And so they've had a very successful launch earlier this late last year. So that's another one. And then there's Dawn, Diaspora Africa Women's Network, which was started by Semhar Araya, who's now head of diaspora for Facebook. Again, I know that's a diaspora organization. And you know what? The next great organization is one that you start. Right? I mean, Mosun said start with the people but I think that if you're looking to be connected to people, then start it. I mean, there's so many platforms that make it easy for you to get connected and even reach out to us. I'm happy for you to send me a LinkedIn request, let me know that you're on here. I always share a lot of great resources through my LinkedIn profile. A lot of our events are free, so we provide those resources as well. So it's just really kind of finding ways to informally connect with people, but also to start your own if you don't see what you're looking for.
Absolutely. And just to add my endorsement for Black Women in Development, it's a platform that I've also, I would say, received a lot of resources and interesting information. And it seems like a safe space for Black women to really connect in development.
But can I say one? I need to give a shout out, Katja. This is a shout out we need to give. And it's not necessarily women, but it's Africans creating impact. And that's the MyPad.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, that's actually how we met.
That's how we met. Yes,
that's how we met.
Network.
Yeah, there's all that, right? So
that's to Camille, right?
Yeah, that's Camille.
So MyPad is the most influential people of African descent, which is an organization that recognizes, leaders in different sectors, both in the continent and in the diaspora as well. So yes, we actually, Liz, you and I met through MyPad.
Yeah, literally, I was looking for something, and Camille connected us. So MyPad, if you can get him, learn about that. So I think it's important for us to give him a shout out.
Thank you for bringing that up. So we're at time, and I again want to thank you both. I always ask people to leave with some parting thoughts. So Liz, maybe you kick us off as we close. Any parting thoughts or comments for our audience?
I think so. The two things I said: storytelling. Learn how to tell your story. Two, and don't be embarrassed about shining light shining light on the work that you've done, the impact that you've created, because that's what people are attracted to. That's how people are going to really step up to support you. Also understand that networking isn't about you getting first. It's about you understanding how to build a relationship that's long term with someone, with you giving into it, and eventually you can reap. Was it you reap what you sow? Yeah, you can reap what you want, but it's important to understand relationships, long-term relationships. That's really what's going to get you what you want. It's really is how business, how nonprofits, is how life works, about really creating that social capital.
Right. Yeah, it's the same for me. It's really around social capital that has, I think that has been my magic in this space. And that social capital leads to collaboration. I think collaboration is so important in this space. And so we need to, we need to let go of our brands and our egos and, and just get the work done. That's what we need. We are all in it to get the work done. So if we need to get together and leave some of our brands behind, let's do it and get the work done. The faster we get out of
our way.
Yeah.
Exactly, right. So that's it for me. Amazing spending time with you all this afternoon.
Likewise.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much. And for those who've asked if we'll be sharing those resources that both of our speakers have mentioned, the list of organizations or the research studies, we'll be sharing that out following this session. Please check us out on philanthropycircuit.org and all our social media platforms. Liz, Mosun, it's been really great having you.
Can I make a quick plug, and Coco will give the link. So we have just we're finishing up the African Resource Mobilization webinar series. It's a 5-part series, and Coco is going to give a link to the first 4. We have the recordings as well as resources we provided. And on Friday, at I think 2 p.m. Watt, 4 p.m. EAT. And which is 9 a.m. Eastern time in the U.S., we're doing a session on how to attract non-traditional funders. And so we're going to have a conversation between a venture philanthropy organization. So this is DRK Foundation that's based out of Silicon Valley, and a Ugandan social entrepreneur, and how they've worked together. And we're going to have a lot of resources. It's a free conversation. So Coco will drop the link for the Zoom registration. And please not only register, but share.
Awesome. Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you for your time. I appreciate each of you. Have a blessed day.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for staying with us.
Okay.